There were 12 in all, boys on the cusp of manhood. Surviving half the year ranging beyond the homeland of their clan was their final test, and they had almost completed it. Dan Davis. Welcome to this week's episode of Warfare, Advancement, and Revisionism, or should I say this week's bonus episode. I admit to have this out a little bit earlier. I want to have our standard weekly episode during this period, but I did also want to continue the history podcasts this October as well. So there will essentially be 5 bonus episodes, which follow, of course, the fantasy historical genre / horror historical genre, whatever. And of course, we will have real history episodes too. So I hope you all enjoy this week's bonus episode. If all goes well, you're hearing this on Wednesday. And then, of course, Monday we had the episode on the Age of Myth. This week's episode, we have The God of Bronze by Dan Davis. And next week's episode, if all holds to pat, we will have an episode of actual history. And then that following Monday, we'll have another bonus episode. And then we'll be back to normal here going into November. So, now, to talk about the author, Dan Davis is a writer. He has done this series, which there's 2 books out currently, and he also has a novel spanning a good portion of time from, I believe it's 1200 to 2000. It's about Immortal Night. I have not read any of those. Then he also has a sci-fi kind of military fiction series that I also haven't read yet. And also, I didn't realize this, but he has a number of historical videos on YouTube. In fact, I had watched a couple of his videos, and then I did not initially make that connection that these were the same people. So when I started doing research on the author for this episode, I realized it was the same channel. Dan Davis History is his YouTube channel. He has quite a bit more subscribers than me, so odds are you listening to this podcast, you may have listened to his or watched some videos of his before too. And he doesn't give too much personal information, but he's very good. He has a very great voice, and I love this book. I love the concept for it, and the sequel is just as good in my opinion. So, what is the God of Bronze? Well, the God of Bronze is essentially a kind of a pseudo-realistic telling of the Hercules myth as it may have actually really, quote unquote, occurred. It's a world much not set in the classical Greek era, but set at a much earlier date in a very different location. I think he claims that this takes place around 3000 BC. And it does not follow Hercules, but instead Hercuhlos and his brother Herkuhlos. These are the 2 main characters of this novel. Herkuhlos, of course, being the basis of Hercules. Herkuhlos is his brother, but also the leader of his Herkuhlos band. And those who may not know, Herkuhlos is it's a hypothetical war band or war party that existed in a lot of Proto-Indo-European groups, and then aspects of this war band would of course be transmitted to various locations that these Proto-Indo-Europeans would have traveled to, and to the people that they would interact with in a number of different ways. And again, this is a theory. It's a very popular theory, though it does have some detractors. We'll get into that when we study the Proto-Indo-Europeans. But essentially, just think of it as a kind of an organized militia, though not necessarily for defense, as we will talk about when we discuss the book. Now, for those of you who are not aware of the myth of Hercules outside of Disney movies, Hercules has a number of stories that he's involved with in the kind of the Greek mythological tradition. But his most famous role in that tradition is him being gifted his 12 labors, where he has to perform 12 monumental tasks to atone for a sin, as it were. Most of these involve hunting down monsters or animals that are extremely fierce and dangerous. In fact, there are those that theorize that the core of this myth may have even been carried over prior to the arrival of Indo-European-based religions, but this may have even been something that had happened during an earlier Neolithic period, where it's a hunter-gatherer society. So the tales of this one person hunting and killing these 12 great animals, is something that at least is carried down in flashes, or maybe the bare bones of that story is something that's carried forward, and then over time, of course, it gets mythologized, aggrandized, and then maybe tied into other stories from other people, or this may have been a group of hunters who are all hunting together, but then they just, over time, kind of got, dissolved into one person. Dan Davis, takes some of this idea, I think, very well as the basis for his novel, but he makes it clear that this is one man who has been tasked with this job of hunting down these 12 dangerous foes. Now, I was thinking at the start that this was something that was going to be a little bit more solely based on history, based on his work and things like that. I thought it would be a little bit more hard history, but I was pleasantly surprised, I think, to say that there are some supernatural / mythological elements that do show up in this. They are, and I think it helps the story. It may be a little pulpy to some, but honestly, for a fantasy novel, it works, and I think it works well. And I'm sure that we'll get maybe a little bit of answers on some of the more mythological aspects of the story. And we've already gotten some once you read the second novel. But Hercuhlos, as he's known at the beginning of the novel, is essentially the number 2 to his brother, Bellelucos. He and 10 other boys of their tribe are in their Herkuhlos, which is a war band, and I'll go into some of the basics of the theory. Essentially, there's a period of time where young men, to prove themselves, have to leave their tribe as a group. They are all bound together by an oath. They are bound to a single leader by the same oath, and he is bound to them, so they have to obey him while they are in this test. During that time, they're in the wilderness. They are doing whatever they have to survive. They're hunting, they're gathering, they are raiding neighbors, or fighting enemies for food or booty or what have you. And then once this test is over, they return. There's some type of ceremony involved, and then they are allowed to return to their home tribe. They are at that point men, and they are allowed all the rights associated with men or freeborn men in their tribe. Now, obviously, there are differences in some of this depending on who you ask. Some of this stuff they would say might not show up till later. Some of this may not even been involved at all. But by and large, that's generally the concept of what we're dealing with. And there are those that argue that this may not have been something that they were forced out of the tribe. They may have lived outside of the tribe for a period of time, but they may have been able to return, that they were not considered men until they had undergone a certain amount of service. In fact, there is some of the more recent stuff I've read. It seems to think like that they were out on their own for maybe 6 months of their final year in this kind of pre-manhood existence, where they were allowed to basically do whatever they wanted to kind of get booty or animals or women from other tribes or other people, to kind of use that as a basis to start their life as an independent male. But the other 6 months, they would undertake it as essentially they would have to fight for the tribe's men. Or the tribe's leadership may essentially rent them out to a allied tribe. So there's 6 months where they have to serve either the tribe or the tribe's allies in some type of seasonal, some kind of seasonal combat, or and then they were allowed to kind of do their own thing essentially for 6 months. In which case they would take as much as they could for to bring it back to the tribe, show that they're ready to be men, and then use that same things they bring back to kind of establish themselves as independent men of the tribe. But that's another theory. Dan Davis is very much, he approaches this from the more traditional idea of the Herkuhlos, which is a roving band of young men who are forced out into the wild. They are essentially in exile. They are wolves in all sense of the word until they return home and become men again. But this plan for them to return home, they are very close. They only have a month left, I believe, at the start of their adventure, or at the start of the book, before they're allowed to return home and become men. It is on their way home. They find a tribe or a location that they believe would be suitable for raiding. And while there, they come across devastation like they've never seen before. Just a huge amount of just wanton slaughter, carnage, something that's beyond even what they themselves would have even thought men to have been capable of. This isn't a normal raiding party. They've seen the aftermath of that sort of thing before. They've even seen the aftermath of battles and things like that. But this is something far and beyond what they're expected to, what they usually deal with. And it is at this that they hear of a large army composed of demons, leading that are driving other men in forward, and that they are essentially collecting all the tribes. They're killing the chiefs that will not join them. They are enslaving everyone who they do not kill in battle. They are taking everything and anything of value, and anything that can't be taken, they are just burning so that no one can remain behind. And it is on this point that they come to the determination that their home may have been in the path of this army. So the first big kind of debate in this in the book is do we forsake our sworn obligation, or do we return home to try to defend the tribe? And this is something that Davis very much plays on especially in the first book. There's always a kind of conflict between, doing one's, sacral obligations, following the will of the gods, nature, what have you. And then there's, the idea of serving, the clan, the group, the Herkuhlos itself, and how that these things are not always, cannot always be done at the same time. So which is more important? Which takes precedent? The Herkuhlos itself is a semi-religious organization, despite what it does. That's a foreign concept to us. Generally speaking, most religious organizations these days do not have a military component, at least here in the West. There are obviously exceptions, and of course historically there are exceptions, but most people in the modern day, again in the West, if some type of religious organization had a military wing, 99% of the time that would be completely unacceptable here. Though again, there are exceptions in the modern day in certain areas of the world. Now, again, big play between duty, duty to your direct kin, duty to your extended clan, duty to the gods. How do all these things interplay with each other? And Davis does a really good job of kind of showing the conflict, not just for the main character and his brother Herkuhlos, but also for the other young men of the Herkuhlos, though they themselves are not nearly as important of characters as Herkuhlos and Herkuhlos. And there is also a conflict between the brothers. It's not, it is something that's constantly kind of harkened back and forth to. And there is a bit of a rivalry between the two. And I'll go ahead and spoil this part of the book. They are twins technically, but they are the very rare occurrence, but it does happen. It is a thing. They are heteropaternal twins, or it's heteropaternal superfecundation is the event that causes this to happen. But it's when twins are fathered by two different men. And this happens essentially when a woman has a second egg released during her menstrual cycle, and she has intercourse with two different men in relatively quick succession, and both eggs end up fertilized. This does happen. It's extremely rare, but it does exist. Now, Herkuhlos, who I'll go ahead and spell this part as well. At some point during the course of the story, he is given an adult name, a male name, a Herkuhlos, and this, of course, being very close to Hercules. But he and Herkuhlos are, they love each other, but they also are too alike to kind of really get along well all of the time. And Herkuhlos is very different from Herkuhlos. He has an advantage that most people don't have. He is considered Godborn. Now, this is, again, one of those mythological elements that I was kind of initially didn't think was going to be in the story, but I was kind of pleased when they, not necessarily when he initially brought it up, but when they developed it a little bit. It was a very interesting kind of, twist to the story. Herkuhlos' father is the Sky Father, the Lord of the Gods. They don't call him Zeus, but that is who his father is supposed to be. He had relations with his mother on the night of her marriage to Bellelucos' father. It is during this event that Bellelucos' father and a number of other notable people and members of the various tribes in the region, they attempted to defend the honor of the marriage, the marital bed, and they are essentially all slaughtered by Herkuhlos' father. And then he has his way with Herkuhlos' mother, and then a short time later, she gives birth to the two boys. She is married off to another chief, a fairly low-ranking chief compared to what she had been married to. But this is kind of done to kind of prevent an all-out war between the various tribes of the region. But this man is a very, he takes his responsibility as the boys' foster father very seriously. He does not wish them harm. He is a good father. He teaches them how to be men, how to live, and eventually they do have a daughter, the younger sister, whom both the brothers are extremely protective and fond of. And for those who may not be familiar with the Hercules myth, Hercules also has a very similar origin to Herkuhlos. He does have a half-brother who is also I believe, a twin. This is Iphicles. He is the son of Alcmene's husband, Amphitryon. And Iphicles is also the father of Aeolus, who was like he was the father. Aeolus is like Hercules' charioteer, and he helps him on a few of these adventures. And I'm assuming that, well, I don't want to spoil too much, but I've already spoiled enough. But that being said, the gods do show up in this, or at least personally you meet one. Fairly early in the story, you meet Kolnos. He is the wolf god. He is kind of the god that oversees the oath and the bond of the Choreos. He himself is extremely large. He, kind of has a almost ephemeral quality to him. He's kind of ragged looking. He looks like a fairly older man, or at least a wizened man. And again, his physical size is imposing. He's larger even than Herkuhlos, who himself is larger than pretty much every man that he knows, or anyone else knows for that matter. But Kolnos even dwarfs him. I should also point out that Herkuhlos' Bellelucos' mother, she is also a descendant of Perseus, who of course is the basis for Perseus in Greek literature. So there is an earlier Godborn. He was the son as well of the Sky Father and a mortal woman. However, he lived quite a while before Hercules did. So Hercules is his descendant, same as Bellelucos, but after a few generations, the Godborn blood begins to dilute and they become more mortal, I guess, for lack of a better term. Though I do think that there is some... I do think there is a more mundane explanation for these gods, at least to an extent. What that explanation is, I don't know. But yeah, that's just kind of the feeling I'm getting, that they may not be 100% kind of on the level. But that's something, of course, we'll have to keep reading and learning about. I think there's only 2 books in the series so far. I've read them both. I'm looking forward to the next one. But essentially, on their while they are, tasked, while they task themselves with finding their family or, determining what is causing this massive wave of destruction, Herkuhlos is given a quest by Kolnos to essentially defeat the causes of this great wave of destruction. And each of these essentially demons, though again, they are probably more divine, I think, than at least the characters would like to acknowledge. The gods essentially they serve the same purpose as the giants and the Herkuhlos that like Zeus binds up after he defeats the Titans. So yeah, essentially they lost the war where Zeus becomes, or the Skyfather becomes the supreme god. And that they have escaped from their captivity, and that they are trying to get out of Dodge, or get as far away from Skyfather as quickly as possible. And essentially, Kolnos, in addition to the tasks that Herkuhlos himself wants to fulfill, Kolnos tasks him with defeating these rebels / escapees. And that is the driving force for this series. I won't spoil it too much, but he does not defeat them all in one book. I'll go ahead and, as you can guess, he does defeat one, at least in the first book. The others, I'll leave that up for future, but that does not necessarily happen the same way in book 2. But this is a very interesting series. I liked it a lot. I thought it was better than Age of Myth, which again I reviewed in the prior episode. Again, there's a little bit of pulp to this, but I don't mind. I love pulp, but this is not. This is meant to be a fairly serious. At least there's a lot of serious things happening in this. There is character death. Sometimes characters, that you would not expect to die. There are some characters who do make it through the first story, and you think will be there, all the way, and they end up getting got, very early in book 2. So, yeah, this is very much like this world is brutal. It's a very cruel world, and I think that's by design. But that's not to say that it is completely filled with blood and guts and slaughter. There are, moments where there are, very deep humanity, kind of a brotherhood between all men type of deal, where, people from different walks of life, they do kind of try and settle matters, peaceably. And there is, there are, not so much in the first book, but there are elements where you can see, different groups kind of blending in culturally and peaceably. And there are parts, where you talk about raiding and fighting, where, there are certain ways you could make this extra bloody, but Davis does a very good job of keeping it just sanitized enough where you can still root for your heroes, and, you can still hate your villains, even though they do some of the same things. Essentially, there are some characters who maintain that sense of humanity and that sense of honor that maybe some of the villainous characters do not. And I think that's a very hard needle to thread, and I think Davis does it, and he does it well. He's a very good author. I was actually pleasantly surprised, especially with the cover of the book. It doesn't look all that professional, in my opinion, but it's very well done. And the second one I've listened to on tape, I've listened to it on Audible. The author, or not the author, but the narrator does a fantastic job. I thought he did great. And it's odd because, again, Davis has his own YouTube channel, and he's got a great voice too. I'm surprised he didn't narrate it himself. I'm sure he was far too busy. But yeah, this is a great book. I loved it. I think the second one's even better. But the first one, I recommend it. I'd give it a solid 9 out of 10. There are some things that I thought maybe could have been done a little bit better. But for a history nerd and like a prehistory person, I think you would find a lot of enjoyment about this. One of the little touches I really liked was you see these rivers, and they share very similar names to what the modern version of those names would be. So we talked about how names for rivers and water sources are sometimes extremely slow to change, if at all. And Dnipro is one of the rivers they run into, which is, of course, the Dnipro now. So that's just one of those nice little kind of cut-ins. And, he does take a little bit of liberties with some historical things, but that's okay. And, he kind of does revel in the very stereotypical, I guess, concepts of the Indo-European tradition, but that's fine. I don't have a problem with that at all. It works with the book. It works with the story he's telling, and we'll talk about some of those traditions and stuff when we talk about the Indo-Europeans and their religion and their bands and bonds with each other, and how we think we know about that, and what is actually known and what isn't, and what's guesswork and what is supported by what evidence, because there's a lot of things to dive in onto that. But Davis does, I think, a very good job of at least laying out a believable Koryios, something that makes sense in the world, and even if it is not our world, it is close enough to our world that something like this could have conceivably existed for whatever reason. But yeah, so again, I think this is a great book, very much worth it. If you have any questions or feedback, please do not hesitate to let me know. You can reach me at my email, waradrevpod@gmail.com. You can contact me via direct message on Twitter or X or whatever you want to call it. You can comment on any of my YouTube videos. I will see it eventually. I'll try to respond as best I can. So, thank you all, and I hope you enjoy, and I hope you will join us next time as well. Thank you, and have a great day. Goodbye.